Welcome to tonight's Touch of Torah with Va-Dor. We thank you all for joining us this August 2nd, 2022. And with us, we have Rabbi Barry Silver, and we have a special guest, Bob Jaffe, coming from north of San Francisco, California. And take it away, Rabbi.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for bringing this wonderful dialogue again with your technical expertise. And I want to thank our special guest, Robert Jaffe. He can tell you a little bit about himself, but he's a double threat. He's quite knowledgeable in Judaism and in law. Imagine that. And tonight we're going to talk about the Torah passage. We're going to talk about cosmic Judaism. We'll talk a little bit about Jewish Renewal and what he's doing out there in California. And then we'll probably talk about the abortion situation that's going on all over the country and here in Florida as well. So the Torah reading this Shabbat is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 1, it's the very beginning of the chapter. And in Deuteronomy 1, Moses is referred to as Moshe Rabeinu, Moses the teacher. And like all good teachers, he believes that repetition is very important in order to teach people well. And you have to reinforce it. And so what he does is he describes what happened, goes back over the history of the Jewish people coming out of Egypt and what happened over the last almost 40 years. Reason being that he's now standing on the brink of entering the promised land, and he's got a new generation. The old generation died out. They didn't have any TV sets or any newspapers to read what happened before. And so Moses decides that he's going to give them a little review of the past. And of course, being a teacher also and a moral spiritual leader, it's not just the facts. He also throws in things that he feels the people did morally wrong so that hopefully they won't repeat these mistakes, and tries to get them to do the right thing so they don't have to wander, that they can enter the promised land. So Moses goes back and reviews the history and explains that he couldn't get into the promised land because the people got him mad, and then he got angry, and then God said he couldn't enter the promised land. He mentioned that they wandered for 40 years because they didn't have confidence in themselves. They looked at the land of Canaan and they just said, it's too formidable, we can't do it, it's not possible, these people are too powerful, let's just go back to Egypt. And they lost heart. And they complained bitterly to Moses. God was outraged, he was incensed. They lacked confidence in Moses and him, in themselves. And he figured these people aren't worthy. They're not the ones who are going to get into the promised land. They still have a slave mentality. It was a lot easier for Moses to get the people out of Egypt, as difficult as that was. But that was easier than getting Egypt out of the people. Couldn't do it. And so they wandered. So Moses is giving a little review. And I guess the moral of the story, according to Moses, is that you have to believe in yourself. You have to have confidence. If you think you can't do something, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you have confidence and you're dedicated to a good ideal, then you can prevail. It was this type of thinking that caused the Jews to be able to reclaim the Holy Land in modern times. When Herzl said, we're going to come back and make a Jewish state and speak Hebrew, and they said he was crazy. The Jews were too weak and dispersed and had no military. He said, Im tirtzu and zo agada. If you will it, it's no dream. And the Jews demonstrated the courage of Joshua and Caleb, who said, Yacholu chala, we shall overcome, rather than the 10 spies who said, we can't do it. And the rest is history. I'm now going to turn it over to Robert Jaffe, coming in from California, very involved with Jewish Renewal. He's got a fascinating group that he works with. And I'd like him to share, just very briefly, a little bit about his background and the orientation of Judaism that he espouses. And then, Robert, I'd like to get your take on the Torah reading. Robert, take it away. Welcome.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'll get to the parasha in a minute. So I spent almost a whole long lifetime being away from Judaism and Yiddishkeit, as I said before. And I just had the great fortune to reconnect with my fellow Jews at a gathering in Oregon some 25 years ago, a gathering that had 1,000 or so people. I'd never until that time had the opportunity or the experience of being Jewish in public. It was a brand new experience. I grew up fearful of being identified as a Jew. I grew up in the 1940s in Los Angeles when the Holocaust was ever present in people's minds, in the minds of the adult, but it was never discussed. And I had to figure out that experience on my own. And as a young man getting a bar mitzvah, I didn't engage with it after I finished my bar mitzvah. So
how did the Holocaust influence your view of Judaism and being Jewish at that time?
At that time, it was as a 10 or 12-year-old doesn't really understand genocide that well. It was just a very, very direct, palpable feeling that being Jewish is dangerous. And indeed, it was for some in the world in Europe. And so I grew up with that, and that Judaism, Yiddishkeit, was something you kept quiet about, you concealed. And I was always, living out the rest of my life, I was always identifying very strongly with being Jewish, but not publicly, okay? So I got very lucky and found a community in Berkeley that celebrated Judaism with music and dancing. They had amazing rabbis as their early leaders. This was the Aquarian Minyan in Berkeley, one of the first Renewal congregations in the United States. And that's where I've been. I formed a little.
If you would explain to everyone, because not everybody knows, when you say renewal congregations, what is Jewish renewal?
Okay, Jewish renewal, you could liken it to, I said earlier, reconstruction. I believe they're very close. There's no real need or religious or theological necessity to believe that the Torah, for example, was written by God. Okay, so, however,
there's no necessity for it, or you dispute it?
No, there's no in renewal, there's no necessity that one believes, as do the Orthodox, for example, that the Torah was written by divinity. And that's an important point, because it lends a flexibility into the beliefs of our congregation, our people. And
Robert, are you saying that you don't have to believe it, or you dispute it and you don't believe it? Or is it just left up to everybody to decide whether God wrote it or not? Does Renewal have a position? God wrote it, God didn't write it, or no position, just leave it up to people?
No position, leave it up to people. And very few would be maintaining theologically. And we do have a few, actually. Some really brilliant members of our community would embrace the notion that divinity wrote the Torah. I think personally, what I've concentrated on after learning and studying Torah are the amazing set of laws that was developed in the first instance at Sinai, and then in the Mishkan. Okay.
Bob, Obadiah is saying on the chat that it sounds like Reconstructionist Judaism, because Reconstructionists tend to also leave that question of who wrote the Torah up to the people and don't have an official line one way or the other.
Right.
How would you distinguish the approach of Jewish renewal to Reconstructionism, or don't you?
I think they're aligned. I've looked at the Siddur. I've looked at the Chumashim for reconstruction. So I think there's a fair alignment between renewal and reconstruction. Mind you, renewal is much less organized, much less actual synagogue organization infrastructure than reconstruction.
Do you follow a Siddur like the Reconstructionists do, or is it just kind of free flowing sermons?
No, we have our Siddurs, but they're written specifically for a musical service. Okay, and so we would begin a Saturday morning service with Pasuke and wonderful songs and contributions. For example, we have some just great musicians in our congregation, and so we sing. So that's
I think you told me that Jewish renewal is Reconstructionist Judaism with more music. Do I remember it correctly?
Perfect, Barry.
Okay, so the philosophy of it, the theology is pretty much the same. You're just more musical and more, I think, more new age. Is that right? Like more new age?
I don't know. I'm not sure about new age. I guess you can use that, whatever it means. We sing a lot of traditional Hasidic music. We sing a lot of nigunim, and if I'll send you a link, Barry, and you can send it out for a Saturday morning, and you can watch the first part of it, the Pasuke, and you'll get a good flavor of what we do. So,
okay, tell me about your particular group, the Minyan, because I think you said that you were one of the very first Jewish renewal congregations in the country. So how did that get off the ground, and where did you fit in?
Let me ask the group, have you heard of, this is to everybody, have you heard of Shlomo Carlebach?
Yes.
Or okay, so if you
assume they haven't, or they don't know much about it, because we're reaching a wide audience. And I can tell you, if they heard the name, very few people could tell you much about him, and many people have never heard of him. So
or
Zalman
Schachter.
Start from scratch.
Okay, it's fresh. It's a great story.
But just give us a quick overview.
Okay, great story. Shlomo Carlebach and Zalman Schachter were Hasidic rabbis with Chabad. Okay, from the source in Brooklyn, and the Rebbe, forget which, I think it was Schneerson, determined that there were so many young people, this is in the early to mid 60s, there were so many young Jewish people who were alienated from Judaism for good reasons, the Holocaust being one. I was one of them. Sent out two of his best rabbis, scholars, teachers, ultra-Orthodox, Shlomo and Zalman, to visit and tour college campuses around the United States. And they were ambassadors, you might say, for Chabad, ultra-Orthodox. And they did their job. In fact, they did it so well that they began to break away, and they kept their orthodoxy, but began to form different associations from the various places that they would visit. I hope I'm explaining that.
And they started their own franchise. And once they got to California, they became Californiaized and started doing more music and started doing less Orthodox rituals.
They had so much fun on the college campuses, and they were both really musical, that they began to develop their own brand of Hasidism. Okay, in Renewal, you will see the elements of the early Hasidism also. When they got to San Francisco, it really developed into I guess you would say, a new form of Judaism. And they formed with a very close friend of mine, R.E. Cooper Smith. Shlomo formed the House of Love and Prayer, had Shlomo as its rabbi for 2 or 3 years. And the House of Love and Prayer evolved into the Aquarian Minyan.
Which you're involved with that. Do you run it, or what's your connection with the Aquarium?
No, I don't run it. I've stayed away from the infrastructure, the organization. I have a wonderful place here across the bay. I started my own little backyard synagogue. It's called Beit Yaakov, and I host the Aquarian Minyan, but I'm also independent. So
Aquarian Minyan is a synagogue, or it's a movement?
It's a synagogue.
And the synagogue meets at your place?
No. I have just a backyard place of gathering on Shabbat, where we do the same things here that we do in the Aquarian Minyan. We have musicians come in, and we have a Saturday morning service. I have the Torah scroll right here.
Do you serve quinoa and tofu and foods and all that stuff?
Yeah.
The smoothies and wheat germ and all that stuff?
Yeah, but people are people everywhere. We're
Do you allow anyone to eat meat in your house?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
Yeah. What about the group? Are you vegetarians?
No. Oh, I am.
You are.
But Va-Dor is gastronomically like the Reconstructionists. They leave it up to everybody else. It's all open.
Yeah.
All right. Now, tell me a little bit about then the Torah passage. Is there a Jewish renewal take on the on this Torah passage, or would you just tell us your own view?
I have serious, when I get to Shlach Lecha, I have serious problems with the story, the way it develops. Incidentally, I have a biblical death penalty defense project, and I have represented Korach for many years and provided a defense of Korach, and we've had several trials here of Korach. But anyway, I have
does that make you the devil's advocate?
I don't know if I am so imbued with a belief that Korach will someday be found innocent and will be released from his underground detention. But I've always had trouble with that story, and the outcome of the story is mamish. The 600,000 chosen warriors in the census will be consigned to their death, to wait out the 40 years.
Well, you probably don't care for the story of Pinchas either, where he's made a high priest because he murdered some people and to stop a plague. You probably don't care for that either. A whole bunch of things in the Torah.
No, right? Pinchas, I don't defend. He's not one of my clients. Okay?
You don't defend people who murder other people to stop a plague. In the middle of coitus, boom, you're dead.
Yeah. No, but
you probably don't like stoning disrespectful kids and stoning women who aren't virgins on marriage either, right?
No, I condemn that. In fact, we had just a wonderful, wonderful Reconstructionist rabbi. I'm not going to go into the little backstories here, but we were taught to speak out against biblical actions of the divinity, to really truly speak out and say no. Okay, no.
So Bob, tell me this.
Yeah.
You know, when you take a non-literal approach, or what I would call a rational approach, and everybody does pretty much, except for ultra-Orthodox, reform, reconstructionists, and you say, well, this part we don't really care for, but this part we think is good. How do you, or how do people in Jewish Renewal, how do they distinguish what's real and what isn't, or what's a good lesson and what isn't? How do you make those distinctions, or do you just pick and choose at whim which ones you like and which ones you don't like?
Oh, that is such a great question. We could have a symposium.
And I'm going to give you a minute to answer that one.
Okay. It's really important that we speak our truth, and that's the starting point, of course. And it has to be, we have to be in sync emotionally, morally, spiritually with what we're reading, teaching, and exchanging with each other. And so if there's a moral problem, and this is the great thing about Judaism, is God is a character in the story. And so we're made for the debate. Okay, the story allows debate with the persona, the divinity. Thank God. Okay. Barry, let me just finish in a minute here. This is almost a midrash, and I've been thinking a lot about it today. It's the consignment of the people who will never reach the promised land, consignment of the 600,000 by way of census and their families. They're sent back to the Sea of Reeds. And that's where the storyline ends, and it's left to us to fill in what happened in the next 38, what happened over the 38 years. And it's such a great topic that we could explore sometime. Is what I thought about today is, what would those parents be teaching their children? What was the message? What needed to be passed on about courage to the kids?
According to the Torah, they were teaching them a horrible message, which is why they were banished and not allowed in. God specifically said that those people are bad news. He wants the message of Joshua and Caleb, who had confidence and wanted to work with Moses to enter the promised land. So whatever message it was, God was hoping, and according to, if you take the Torah at face value, God didn't want them teaching any message, because that's specifically what happens in this passage. In the first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses is saying to those people, you guys messed up, and now you're going to encourage another generation. And in the last passage, in the last sedra, he said to the tribes of Gad and I think Gideon, he said to them, you guys don't want to enter the promised land, and now you're going to contaminate these people just like you did years ago, just like your fathers did years ago. I don't want you to spread all this negativity. So it's pretty clear that in the Torah, God and Moses didn't want them teaching anything to their kids. He wanted a new way of thinking, a new generation. And that's kind of what Jewish Renewal is about. Jewish Renewal says, in the past you had these ideas and some of them weren't working for you. We need to do something new. We need to keep Jewish ideals and values, but we need to express it in a different way, because the old ways aren't really working.
That's why I called my story midrash, because if you read in the text, they are sent back to the Sea of Reeds. So what happened at the Sea of Reeds? Okay, that was one of the greatest showing of the Israelites learning to deal with their fear. Okay, if you read the text, and it goes back to Exodus, back to Exodus, it will show that they had to confront their own fear. The text says they turned around 3 days out and came back to face the Egyptian charioteers. Now that is facing fear. So the text in Deuteronomy has them going back to that very place where they learned to deal with their fear. So the midrash has the parents teaching their children not to be afraid. Okay.
But the thing about the midrash just means something that the Orthodox made up in order to try to reconcile certain things. But there's nothing like that in the Torah. According to the Torah, if you read what the Torah is saying, the Torah is saying that generation was bad news. God was really angry at them, and he said, you're going to die in the wilderness because you didn't have faith. and your children, I'm gonna teach your children. Moses is gonna teach your children. Joshua and Caleb are, because you guys screwed up and you're being banished in the wilderness. These people are going to go under new leadership and new ideas. The Midrash might try to whitewash it or explain it away, but if you read the Torah was pretty clear. God and Moses had no use for that generation and consigned them to wandering. And you can say the same thing is true today, that there's a lot of Jews who want to go back to their comfort zone. They have certain ideas about God, about Judaism, about tradition, and it makes them feel good, and they're comfortable. But there's other people pushing the envelope saying, well, wait a minute, some of those ideas don't make a lot of sense. Like your idea about God being angry and killing people and being jealous, that doesn't make sense. But many Jews say, well, no, I'm comfortable with that. I want to believe in that. It makes me feel good to think that there's someone out there taking care of me. But there's a lot of other Jews saying, no, it's not working. Let's try something different that's more helpful and more courageous, and take a strong stand and confront the world as it is. And so what we do at Va-Dor is we believe that Jewish ideals and principles and values are very, very important, but we believe that each generation and each reiteration of Jewish civilization is moving forward. That's really what Reconstructionist Judaism was about. That's what Reform Judaism was about also. Both of them were saying, we don't have the answer today. It's not called Reformed Judaism. Some people say, I'm Reformed. It's not called Reformed because the reforming process didn't stop. Reform means that we take Jewish tradition and we allow it to continue to evolve with every generation. And that's what Reconstructionist Judaism does. It was promulgated as a way of keeping up with evolution and with progression of thought, and saying each generation keeps going. And we like to expand with the new generation. And so that's what we do at Va-Dor also. We've expanded this and used some of the greatest scientists, some of the greatest philosophers, and we allow Judaism to continue to grow. I think it would be good to get some other people in the mix. So why don't we open it up and see if anybody else wants to opine, or if they want to ask a question. So Sharon, can you open it up to everybody else and see if you want to participate?
I'd like to ask Bob Jaffe his take on God. So
all right, Bob, what's your take on God?
I knew I was going to get asked that today. So
the last thing you wanted to be asked, right?
When I do a Torah service Saturday morning, I will refer to the divinity for sure. I don't avoid that, because the divinity is an important character persona in the story. And it's the story itself that has the meaning, many, many levels of meaning, linguistic and metaphor. And so I use the teaching I use the Torah as a teaching tool. And I myself have a rather distant relationship with divinity, but yet I embrace the notion of an evolving consciousness, for sure. I grew up reading Teilhard de Chardin, and he's one of my teachers. And so I believe that humankind is part of an evolution of developing consciousness that is actually scientifically provable and palpable and is experienced. Do I talk to God in the morning? No, I don't.
You still didn't answer the question. What is your concept of God? Or do you not really have any formulated concept of it?
My concept of God is what I just said, is that divinity is a evolving consciousness, and that has a a human dimension to it, that we are the front line of that evolving consciousness.
But aren't we just a Johnny come lately in the development of the universe? I mean, the universe went on for the vast majority of its time without any humans at all, and without really any consciousness at all as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. We are the latest blip, but look at what we are, what we do, where we've been. Look at what we've conceived in call it the flow of consciousness. If you go back into ancient Jewish law that was developed first at Sinai and then in the Mishkan, you will see an amazing sense of sensitivity to fairness, honesty, defending the weak, the disabled, defending the environment, which is the most important teaching in all of Leviticus, is Parsha Bahar, is defending this very earth. So if you look at that, you see our place in that development of consciousness is totally amazing, really.
Yeah, getting back to God, when the universe started, there was no consciousness, right? There was just atoms, elements, and even pre-atoms, right? There was no consciousness at that time. So God is usually depicted as that which generated everything, but at that time there was no consciousness or humans.
All right, that's my phone. I got to turn it off. Hang on a second. Let me.
No worries. All right, maybe God's calling in to speak up for himself.
On my screen, it was not God, but
Right.
it was a person who is suffering an older man suffering very debilitating illness, chronic fatigue. We all know what that is.
Yeah.
So to help that individual, I was arranging a Zoom call with him to help that individual. That's our mission. That's our legacy, straight out of ancient Jewish law. It is so direct, one-to-one. That's what we do. And we're defending pregnant women. Amazing, because that's what we do.
Well, I'm glad you're providing assistance to those who are ailing. That's certainly a critical, important Jewish concept. Let me just share with you very briefly at Va-Dor what our concept of God is, because we don't mind getting asked. It's a good question. It's on people's minds all the time. We have a very clear answer and a very science-based answer, an answer that is pretty much irrefutable. So for instance, I don't believe in God. I know God. I know what's going on to a large extent because I base it on science, and science knows a lot of stuff. So this is what we know, that there's a creative power in everything. It unites everything, and it transcends everything. That's what God is. It's a creative power. It's in you and me because we started out as one cell. That one cell knew what to do to multiply itself and to differentiate and then to grow different limbs and blood vessels and heart and lung. The cell did that through its own creativity. I mean, it got some nourishment from the mom, but the cell figured it out and became 100 trillion. So there's an incredible creative power inside of you and me and a dog and a blade of grass. So God is this creative power that's in all, unites all, and it transcends all because the power is greater than any one iteration of it. It's permeating everything. And this creative power in all that unites all and transcends all is constantly changing what is into what could be. The very essence of God is change, transformation, evolution. And the role of religion, as you say, Jewish ideals, is to try to channel that transformation of what is into what could be, into what should be. Because if you look at nature and the universe, there's massive destruction. There's stars that are being swallowed up by black holes. There's earthquakes. There's species. Over 90% of the species were wiped out before humans even got here. And then we accelerated the process. So there's massive destruction, massive evil, suffering. Judaism is an attempt to channel that transformation of what it is into what could be into what should be. And that's based on Jewish ideals of love and kindness and hope and compassion and mercy and peace, and all of those ideals trying to channel that transformation. So that's pretty much what God is, and it's not speculative. I mean, you and I both know that we started out as a cell and became 100 trillion. That's not something that, gee, I think it might have happened. We know this. We know there's a creative power. It's not something I believe, it's something we know. And it's at work in the universe, because the universe started out with a singularity and it became all of this. So that's the beauty of using science to help interpret Judaism, because it gives you a level of accuracy that blind faith does not. Anybody else have any?
Yes,
questions?
Stanley, go ahead, Stanley.
Yes, Robert, do you prefer to be called rabbi?
Me?
Yes.
I'm not a rabbi at all.
Okay.
Call me Bob.
He's a lawyer.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer.
Okay.
Call me Bob.
Esquire.
If you want, but I respond to Bob.
So my question is, you mentioned that you have a lot of music
Yeah.
in your services and so forth. Could you be more specific? What specific songs and prayers do you like to use?
Oh, thank you. I'm having a little spell here with names lately. Debbie Friedman, we do a lot of, we just sing a lot of Shlomo Carlebach, who was, besides being a very gifted rabbi, was an amazing musician and composer. And we have some very gifted professional musicians among us and singers that come on Saturday morning, and we have a music session at the Reform synagogues that I'm associated, that I know. There's always a lot of music, and sometimes there's jazzers. I mean, some really great musicians playing jazz, or Reform is full of music, is it not? That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So you use a lot of the music from some of the great modern composers and writers right there, like Debbie Friedman, like a lot of Reformed synagogues do already, and Reconstruction. It's very simple.
Yeah, it is.
Anybody else?
Along with that, Bob, would you know of Jeff Klepper, Noah Aronson, some of those people?
I don't.
Some of that music?
Are these musicians?
Yeah,
they're
they write music. They write a lot of the Jewish music that we subscribe to, basically.
You might use their stuff, but not even recognize the name of who wrote it. But Bob, I have a question for you. Since you're a lawyer and you want to talk about the abortion situation, what's your take on that? The overturning of Roe v. Wade and how it impacts on Judaism and the practice of Judaism?
Depends on what state you're in, doesn't it? Unfortunately, it really does.
That's true.
For women and when I say women, I mean their families, of course. If you're a resident of Texas, oh my God, I'm so sorry that those justices, the new justices on the US Supreme Court, have mangled the laws of Texas and allowed them to be enforced. I'm sorry, that didn't come out right. The justices have not mangled the Texas law, they've upheld them, and the laws mangle human beings. I mean,
how does that affect Judaism? How are those laws at odds with your understanding of the Jewish view and Jewish law on abortion?
Yeah, that's our mission, isn't it? To assist those who need assistance for medical care, not just abortion, but medical, just basic humane medical care. And this is what we do. This is what we're challenged to do. This is our mission.
What about the fetus? What's your view on the fetus and the rights of the fetus to live?
I think, Barry, you and I are fairly close on this. It'd be a good discussion because the standard, I'm just going to talk about the standard of Roe Wade and Casey. This is what we covered the other night. And I'm sure everybody is familiar with the notion of viability of the fetus. Everybody familiar with that? Because that's the legal, or was the legal measurement under Roe Wade, which allowed a pregnant woman to terminate her pregnancy prior to viability, which is roughly 20 weeks. And that was a constitutional right enforced in and all of the federal courts until May 29th of this year, whenever it was. Is that?
No, my question is not Roe v. Wade. My question is Jewish law. What does Judaism have to say about abortion, and how is that? And what does Judaism have to say about the fetus? The other side is saying that you're going around killing preborn babies and fetuses. And I was just curious as to your take as a lawyer and someone involved in Judaism. What's your take on how do these laws that restrict abortion, is that violating Jewish law or contradicting how Jews feel about it?
That's a good question. So I will confess that I don't have a deep background in Jewish law. We have our Jonathan Seidel, who you met.
Yeah.
Who you met was doing a comprehensive course on ancient Jewish law, which gives greater weight to the needs of the mother, and the mother would be able to have an abortion if need be, far beyond viability. But I think where we all agree is, according to Jewish law, life begins not at conception. Life begins at birth. And that's the point of, I think, your lawsuit.
It is.
I use the possessive your lawsuit, Barry, because I think you're doing an amazing job. Really, it's your lawsuit. And so it is an aspect of freedom of religion under the First Amendment. And it's very powerful. It's headed for numerous hearings, I think, around the country. And pray to God that the Supreme Court doesn't get its hand on it.
Well, thank you for your kind words. Are you actually going to pray to God, or are you just using that metaphorically?
I've just used that metaphorically.
Okay. Anybody else want to weigh in on the discussion? Any topic: abortion, the Torah reading, God, Jewish renewal. Anybody have any thoughts or questions? This is your big chance. Go ahead, Valerie.
Well, it sounds, Robert, very much like you have the same type of philosophy that we do at Va-Dor. I've listened to this conversation now for quite a bit of time, and your take on the Torah and your take on how you practice your religion seems in lockstep, quite frankly, for me on many fronts with Va-Dor. With regard to music, with regard to how you approach the Torah, whether you believe it was written by God, not written by God, whether you believe there is a divinity or not. I mean, that's very much in lockstep with what we do here at Va-Dor. And I know that we have discussed the Torah on many levels. And even Rabbi Barry has said, even in the Torah, it says that life begins with breath. You know, God, quote unquote, breathed life into Adam. And therefore, you know, and I have brought this up on numerous occasions. I've recently lost my husband, who is a scholar in constitutional law. And, you know, the third rail, and I have said this on numerous occasions, the third rail in US politics is to never interfere with religious beliefs. They avoid that with a passion if it steps on a Jewish, and not only Jewish, but religious beliefs. And this particular decision by the Supreme Court smacks defiance in the face of the Jewish religion. We
Yes.
believe very firmly for thousands of years, not hundreds of years, not nouveau law, thousands of years, that life begins with breath. End of discussion. There is nothing else to discuss. So these laws, as far as my perspective, is interfering with our religious beliefs. And that has always been a third rail in politics, to avoid stepping on any one religious belief. So, I'm very confused by what's going on here. It really is, to me, a dichotomy in our philosophies.
Well, yeah.
If I could answer you, I used a quotation from Sandra Day O'Connor's incredible opinion in Casey versus Planned Parenthood. And perhaps I can send a link to that quotation. She really understands the role, the dilemma of women, and in spiritual terms, okay? And it's breakthrough law of the good kind. And so the Supreme Court opinion that she writes does recognize the right of the state to regulate pregnancy beyond a certain point. And that's that was the constitutional principle. In your lawsuit, Barry, you have an uphill climb here. I realize that, because
I don't think so. I think we have a very, very, very strong case.
I think you do.
Let me just share with. I just want to respond to what Valerie said. Our view towards Judaism, God, religion, social action, protecting the planet, women's rights, very, very similar to Jewish Renewal, and we're in solidarity with Jewish Renewal, with Reconstructionists, with the Reform social action. What we do at Va-Dor is we embrace the best of all traditions, and we deeply cherish Jewish Renewal as a way of expressing spirituality through music and through prayer, and also taking a stand on issues. Where we depart from Jewish Renewal, Reconstructionists, is that, like Robert said, their view about God is, it's up to you. Everybody can have a view, and they don't weigh in on that question one way or the other. They don't say they're definitely, the God of the Bible is real, the God of the Bible isn't real, that this is what God is. They tend to avoid the question, as we saw, and they do the same thing with Reconstruction. The difference is that at Va-Dor, we don't avoid the question, we embrace it, and we offer a way that people can think about God in a way that's awe-inspiring, that's wondrous, the numinous, and also that is squarely consistent with science and reason. If you think about the creative power that I was referring to, that's in everything, and you learn about science, you know that every day we take 20,000 breaths. Every day, like the original expansion and contraction of the universe is replicated in us. There's miracles happening every day. Every day, the sun is channeling energy that's converted into matter and converted into food. This is miraculous and awe-inspiring. We celebrate that, but we don't just say, well, gee, we don't really know what God's all about. We do know about this creative power. We know it exists. We know it's in us and everything else. And if you want to know about it, it was actually Maimonides who said, if you want to know God, study science. The fingerprints of this creative power is written all over us and the universe in the realm of science, and it's knowable. And if somebody says that, well, I believe in the God of the Bible, that's inconsistent with reason. It's inconsistent with science. It's inconsistent with the philosophy of Va-Dor. Does that mean we throw them out and say, what, you believe in that? You have to leave? Of course not. Everyone is entitled to believe anything they want at Va-Dor or at a Reconstructionist synagogue or an Orthodox synagogue. You could walk into the Orthodox synagogue and not believe in God at all, but they're not going to toss you out. But they will explain their point of view. So the point of view of Judaism at Va-Dor is that there is this creative power and it's knowable. And it's not distant, it's relatable. It's within us. And every time we contemplate the miracles of the universe, we're experiencing that, and we're experiencing that sense of awe. Regarding the lawsuit, I just want to share it also. Robert's right that usually the law tries not to infringe on religious rights, as Valerie said, but a lot of times it does. So you have a case where my religion says that I should be able to hit my kids. And the government says, well, we don't believe in child abuse. My religion says that I should be able to swing a chicken over my head. The government might say, well, we don't believe in abusing animals. My religion might say, I believe in being able to take drugs whenever I want, or having many wives. The religion sometimes yields to the government, but there's a test for it. And the most powerful test, most powerful legal argument is RFRA, Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. Nobody's ever used it before in abortion until now. And the reason why I say I think we have a very strong case is because we are using a law that is powerful, and it's been recognized as powerful by the US Supreme Court. In many cases, it relies on RFRA. So it can't say like privacy, gee, I don't see that, I don't understand it, I don't agree with it. They've used it, and now we're going to use it against them and against the proponents of this drastic law, which does violate Judaism. It criminalizes Judaism, and it demonizes Judaism, and it equates abortion with killing babies, which Jews have been accused of for the last 2,000 years. So it promotes anti-Semitism.
Indeed.
And the reason why I think that we have a very strong case and a very good chance of winning is because we have someone on our team who's a genius when it comes to Jewish law and American law and constitutional law. And his name is David Ferleger. He's on our team, and he is a heavyweight, a powerhouse with others. And I like David. He's kind enough to come on the line here, even though we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to cut this short pretty soon. I'm going to invite Bob to come back because this was a great conversation. I just want to introduce everyone to this wonderful attorney who is a double threat like Bob Jaffe. He's an attorney, federal law, constitutional law, and a scholar of Judaism. David, take it away. Why don't you introduce yourself and say a few words, if you would.
First, I hope my dog cooperates here for a minute.
We're dog friendly. It's all right.
Barry, it's a pleasure to be here, having a chance to study Torah, or talk about Judaism is something I do twice a week with a chavruta, with a study partner, and my life.
And with your dog.
In general.
David, you show dogged determination in your study of Judaism.
My wife is a rabbi, and I learned from her too. But mostly, I just want to say, first, thank you, Barry. It's a little too much. Barry and I have talked a lot about legal stuff the last night, but it's a pleasure to hear you talk theology and talk about the values and principles of our Judaism. So that to me is even more valuable than all our legal discussions.
David, I may be barking up the wrong tree, but I would be interested in getting your take on the discussion that we had. Your discussion about Jewish ideals about God and about how the law of abortion in Florida and elsewhere is impinging on Jewish rights. If you could just take a moment.
Sure. Barry and I have talked about this, and I want to just tell my dog to just wait a minute. The insight that Barry has, and that I've thought a lot about since we've been talking, Barry. Let me go in the other room. Is about the word we used a few minutes ago, the breath. Whether it's the breath of the newborn baby, and somebody mentioned the breath that God breathed into Adam and Eve. And we can go back one step further even maybe the biggest step, which is at the creation, before there was anything, as Barry pointed out, before there was consciousness, God hovered over the face of the deep, it's translated often, and God essentially breathed life into the universe. So
Yeah.
at every point we have that in our tradition. And when I looked in the Talmud at questions of abortion, the Talmud is, probably a lot of us know, the Talmud deals with stories and examples. The Talmud is not like theoretical. So when the Talmud talks about protecting the mother's life, the Talmud has, and forgive me for this graphic image, the Talmud says that it's so essential that a woman be allowed to have an abortion, that when an abortion is required, which it sometimes is in Judaism, the midwife reaches into the uterus and pulls out the fetus limb by limb. So that is so graphic, I apologize for even saying it, but the Talmud has no hesitation saying that sometimes, and it's sad, but sometimes we have to protect the life of the mother or of the baby, the fetus. So being able to recognize now, as the lawsuit that Barry conceived and filed, recognize now a right to a religious or a conscientious objection to this law is really what I think we need to do. We don't want to, I don't think we want to say, we'll see how we come out, Barry. I don't think we want to say that Jews don't have to obey a law. What we do want to say is that the law has to obey and recognize the spiritual life of Jews.
That's a good way of putting it. I just want to share with you also the profound statement you made about the beginning. The Torah starts out, B'reshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, and then it says, V'ruach Elohim rachefet pnei Adam tahom, which means that first God creates earth, but it's lifeless, and then it says Ruach Elohim, the spirit of God, and that is the essence of human spirit. We have a ruach inside of us, and it's also the same word as the wind. So this wind or the spirit is inside of us and is associated with life, and that's what the Torah is trying to tell us, that the breath and breathing is life, and there's a divine spark in us because we have that within us as well. Valerie, go ahead.
And I'm glad we have a couple of attorneys on here as well, because this particular decision by the Supreme Court is, I think, more far-reaching than even the judges realized. And I had mentioned this before, because now this could impact the in vitro fertilization. What do you do with an egg that is not viable? Or what do you do with an egg that is frozen and is not wanted? If this is going to be the direction that the law is going to, then what is going to be happening with people that need in vitro fertilization? People are turning away from it now because they don't know what to do if an egg is not viable. If it is viable, does it have a right? Does it doesn't have a right? I mean, I don't think, because I heard some medical people discussing this, that the attorneys as well as the judges don't have a medical background. And this particular law can have far-reaching effects on families and in vitro fertilization, and people that actually do want to have families that are now will possibly not be able to or not even think about it because of this law.
Yeah.
You know, so I think
Clarence Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He said that this is now going to open up all these other decisions like contraception and right of privacy and all this other stuff. He knew exactly what he was doing. And you're right. Yeah. They did not base it on medicine or on science. They based it on religion. That's the whole point of our lawsuit. They took a religious proposition, life begins at conception, which is completely alien to Judaism, logic, science, and common sense. And they use that as the standard, not the medical standard, as you say. And they didn't care or they don't mind overturning all the other decisions that have been made based on reason and common sense. And that's what's really, really scary about it. And that's why we're using RIFRA in order to hit them with an argument that they've used themselves based on religious freedom and the freedom of the Jewish people.
Now, I also have a question. Now, RIFRA is also constitutionally still on the books, and I believe 21 states currently, including Florida.
Florida's
So
one of them, yes.
how does that affect this decision? Because it is you cannot change the Constitution unless you have a certain percentage of votes. I think it's 60 or whatever it is. But if it's constitutionally still on the books and accepted in 21 states, how does this affect this decision? I'm confused about that.
RIFRA is not a constitutional provision. It's a statute. It's a law, but it implements the constitutional right to religious freedom, which includes the right not to have a religion.
So what RIFRA says is, if the state passes a law like they did on abortion, there's a very strict scrutiny standard that's going to be applied if someone claims that it violates their religion. So if you say, well, Judaism has a different view on religion, under a more relaxed standard, they could say rational basis. Well, if there's some basis for the law, even though it affects you, sorry, too bad, your law can't trump, or Jewish law can't trump this law that was just passed. RIFRA says the opposite. What RIFRA says is that freedom of religion is so important in the Constitution that we're now writing into law of protection. And it says this: if the state passes a law and someone comes forward and say, your law is restricting my religious freedom, here's the standard. The state now has the burden of showing that there was a compelling interest in the law. They have to show a compelling interest. And to say, well, we have a compelling interest in protecting a zygote from day one, they can't do it unless they're relying on some religious thing to say, well, it's a human being at day one. They can't show it. And they have to show not only a compelling interest, but they use the least restrictive means of trying to further that interest. And the fact that there's no religious exemption, they didn't allow certain people to be able to exempt out if it's violating their religion. It's not the least restrictive means. And they used a sledgehammer approach. No exceptions, rape, incest, mental health. And so they're going to have a very, very tough time defending that law, HB 5, under the RIFRA standard. And it's never been used before for abortion, but it will be used now. And we're looking forward to our day in court so they can try to defend this law under that strict scrutiny standard. I think that this has been a great conversation. And I do want to invite Bob back because he was very enlightening about Jewish renewal and about his approach to Judaism. It's a joyous approach that we share, and also about the legal issues. And we have plenty to talk about. We just scratched the surface really with Bob. And I apologize for kind of moving it along, but I'm actually amending the complaint right now. And David is now watching over me to say, why are you on with so late in the night? You got a lot of work to do, Rabbi. You got to get going. So I'm going to conclude this, at least my portion of it. And I'm going to invite Bob back. And David, of course, you're always welcome. And I do really want to thank David sincerely for not just getting involved in this case, but putting his heart and his soul and his Jewish neshama, his Jewish ruach into this case, because I feel really good being part of a legal team. And I thank you. I thank you for showing up here. I thank everybody else for getting involved also. Bob, do you want to share a final word or thought with us?
A final word is Midrash is not just for the Orthodox, it's for all of us, because we are taught that we can debate God, the word of God. And this is what we're taught also by Moshe Rabeinu. And so there's room for Midrash among us non-Orthodox. So it's been great meeting everybody, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Amazing. Great, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we enjoy Midrash at Va-Dor also. We just don't consider it like from
No.
on high or anything. It's just a story, like the Wizard of
Just a-
Oz story or
It's
something.
just a story.
It's a teaching story. We view it the same way. Thank you
Right.
very much, everybody. That was a lot of fun.